With this blues guitar lesson for beginners video, we'll take the next step closer to being able to solo and improvise a blues by showing you some standard or classic blues riffs. We'll also take these riffs and practice them along with backing rhythm tracks, along with guitar tabs and box pattern diagrams. We'll cover it all with this step-by-step approach. A riff can be described as a sort of musical sentence, and if you want to solo or improvise with blues or rock, you need to first develop a musical vocabulary of riffs, and you do that by copying and memorizing a collection of standard blues riffs. And it doesn't matter if it's yourself, Jimi Hendrix, Carlos Santana. Everyone at one point was a beginner, and they had a blank page, a blank palette in front of them, and they were like, hey, I want to learn guitar, show me some riffs. And throughout the years, through generations of guitarists, there have been many standard riffs that have been passed on from generation to generation, and that's what we're going to do with this lesson. We're going to introduce you to some of those standard classic blues riffs. All the riffs we're going to cover will be derived from the standard pentatonic minor scale box pattern, and we're going to introduce each riff in the key of A blues. So putting those two together, if we take the box pattern and start playing along the 5th fret, starting on the bottom string, let's do a warm-up of the box pattern. You may already be familiar with it, but it's a good idea to make sure you can sync up what I'm going to play with what's showing on the screen here with the tab. So here's an example going up and down the A blues scale. Let's do another run through, this time visualizing the box pattern. What's on the screen now is a box pattern diagram. It's pretty much the same thing we just played, only thing the box pattern emphasizes the finger numbers. Those are the numbers in the circles. It doesn't tell you exactly what notes to play, but it's the pattern you're going to visualize. And these riffs are going to be played within this pattern. So one more run through, syncing it up with the box pattern diagram. Here we go. So if everything syncs up and you can reasonably keep up with that pace, you'll be ready now to start our first standard blues riff. The first riff we're going to cover is a riff that I refer to as the blues riff. And the reason why I named it so is because this particular riff has been around for years, and you'll hear either the exact version of it or variations of it in dozens of classic blues and rock songs. And the riff, if you're a beginner, it's going to introduce two new blues techniques for you, bending and vibrato. And let's do a quick preview of the riff, and then we'll break it down step by step. Here's how the riff sounds. Now, of course, if you're a beginner, you might be thinking that looks a little tough, but it's a lot easier than you think. There's only 3 steps involved in learning to play this riff, and we're going to break down each step in the next clip. Step 1 with the blues riff is the bend, and we're going to start with the 3rd finger on the 3rd string 7th fret. Now the key to bending is using multiple fingers to bend or push the strings, and how we do it here is we have our 3rd finger on the 3rd string 7th fret. The 1 and 2 fingers are going to go down on the same string right next to the 3rd finger. You don't have to worry about placing them along the frets. You just tuck them right in. You sort of scrunch the fingers in there. And when you have multiple fingers used for bending, it not only gives you better tone, pressing with more weight, pressing down against the fretboard, but also better control over the bend. The string is less likely to slip out of the bend when you have multiple fingers. And with the bend, you push the string up. Now, for a beginner on acoustic guitar, it's going to be pretty tough to hit that pitch. If you get close, as long as you're trying early on, eventually you're going to build up finger strength. If you can do it on acoustic, electric will be a piece of cake. And how much you bend? Well, the ideal is to bend a whole step higher than the note we're playing. And what I mean by that is, if we went up to the 9th fret, same string, just slid the fingers up 2 frets, that's the pitch we want to hit when we bend. and that's going to be a big challenge early on. But like I said, if you get close, good enough if you're a beginner. So step one, that's it. There are only 2 other steps to complete the whole riff. Step 2, you simply flatten your finger along the top 2 strings and then play them like so, 2nd and 1st string. And again, if you visualize the box pattern, or within that box pattern, the A blues box pattern, bending the 7th fret, and then if you think about that first finger along the 5th fret for A blues, you just play those top 2 strings. Step 3, the final step with the blues riff, is just descending down the pentatonic minor scale box pattern, which we reviewed earlier. We're going to stop, we're not going to go all the way down to the bottom string. We're going to stop on the 4th string. So the descending riff, step 3, is after we play those top 2 strings, then we start to descend down the box pattern, going down to the 2 string with our pinky on the 8th fret, and 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. Now on that last note, you may have noticed we sort of shook the string a little bit. That's called vibrato technique. And again, with vibrato, like bending, you want multiple fingers, or at least 2 fingers. And what you do, it's kind of like getting an electric shock. We're not changing the pitch of the string as much as we did when we bent that first note. We're just sort of adding like a sort of an exclamation point at the end of that sentence. And vibrato takes a while to get good at as well, because you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to sound like a slinky. Here's too much vibrato. You know, it's just enough to put a little emphasis on that last note. And let's put together now, real slow, we'll walk through each step. Step 1 is the bend. Step 2, top 2 strings. Step 3, descend down the box pattern. Another note here, if you're looking at the tab, vibrato is notated with that squiggly line right next to the 7. So with that, what we will do in the next clip is we'll review the blues riff, where you can play it 3 consecutive times. Coming up, we're going to practice playing the blues riff along with a backing rhythm track. But to make things a little more interesting, we'll also add in playing the pentatonic minor box pattern up and down as well. So we're going to put the 2 together. We're going to combine the 2 into a sequence or a running order. And before playing with rhythm, it's always a good idea to maybe rehearse those riffs beforehand, because once you hear that rhythm, it's going to sort of throw you off. It's fun. Ultimately, it's fun, but early on, it's good to rehearse things first. So let's do that right now. And again, the running order will be starting with the blues riff. And then calmly and coolly, we're staying within that box pattern. We go back to that bottom string 5th fret and start going up and down the scale. Let that last note ring or sustain. Same note again. Put a little sustain on that note, and then go back to the riff to end the sequence. And then what we'll do at the end of the rhythm track, we want to play this note to sync up with the last chord that's going to be strummed. That produces a harmonized ending. So before the rhythm track, what we'll do in the next clip is we'll review combining those 2 options, the running order. You can practice it once through, and then we'll set you up to play with the rhythm. Before we play along with the rhythm track in the next clip, one more tip to give you for playing with rhythm, and that is to prioritize playing correct notes with clarity before you worry about playing with speed. A lot of people want to sort of show off right away, but for beginners you don't want to do that. You want to hear how these winter riffs sound when played correctly over a backing rhythm. That's going to help things soak in later on down the road for phrasing. And in fact, what we'll have on the next clip, there will be a guide solo track. I'll be playing the riffs, so if you follow along with that, in other words, if you don't play ahead of the guide solo or behind it, try to play right with it. That's going to help develop good phrasing for down the road. And also don't forget the harmonized ending. We've already emphasized this, but at the end of everything, if you play this note, jump up to that top string 5th fret. That's a great way to wrap things up. Again, that's called a harmonized ending. The pentatonic minor box pattern is a movable box pattern. In other words, you can shift the same box pattern up or down different fret positions to play in different keys. So for example, if we were in A along that 5th fret, moving up to or moving up 1 fret to the 6th fret, that results with the key of A sharp, also known as B flat blues being played, because A sharp, B flat, those are two names for the same note called enharmonic notes. And with that, it's a good idea with the blues riff to practice that in different keys, because if the box pattern is movable, so is the riff. So as long as you keep the fingers aligned, it's a movable riff. And a good idea early on is to practice the blues riff along lower fret positions. The frets get farther apart, and that makes it a little bit more challenging to play. It's a good workout for the fingers. In fact, probably the ultimate would be along the 1st fret, which is F blues. Here's the box pattern. And here's the blues riff in F. It's also a good idea, once you do that, to practice the blues riff higher up the fretboard, because as the strings, or frets I should say, get closer together, it's a little more challenging to get clarity, because you have to be more focused on getting those fingers properly aligned to the frets. And what we're going to do in the next clip is we're going to combine the riffs with the blues riff and going up and down the scale in D flat blues. D flat blues, if say we started from A and counted up the chromatic scale, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D flat is C sharp. So frets are closer together up here. A little review of how to play these riffs in D flat before we go to the rhythm track. Here's how it'll sound. That same running order, we'll go back to the blues riff. So with that warm-up, with the next track, you can practice doing the same thing along with the backing rhythm in D flat blues. Next riff is a riff I call the bend and release riff, and this involves a variation of the bending technique, which is the release bend. And before we put the whole riff together, let's show you what a bend and release is. We're going to have our third finger on that third string 7th fret, and for a bend and release, we do the same thing we did with the previous riff. We'll push up on that 7th fret, again multiple fingers. But then, while it's still sustaining, we release the bend. So we're actually playing more than one note, but only plucking the string once. Let's do that bend and release again. And again, that'll be a little challenging to keep that sustain going, but again, for beginners, that's the whole point, is to give you these challenges to build up your finger strength. And with that bend and release technique, now let's put that into the bend and release riff. Again, we're going to introduce these riffs in A, and the bend and release riff will start actually on the 4th string, 7th fret, and we're going to ascend up the box pattern 7, and then next string 5, 7, so sort of a 3-note dun dun dun. Now we're on that 3rd string 7th fret. We're going to pluck that same note again with the bend and release. And then same string down to the 5th fret, 1st finger, and then back to the very first note we started with, and if you can, throw in a little vibrato on that note. The difference between this and the first riff is we only play the last note once. We go to immediate vibrato on that 7th fret. Let's put together the complete bend and release riff. And what we'll do in the next clip is you can practice the bend and release riff 3 consecutive times. Now with the previous bend and release riff as well as the blues riff, whenever you learn a standard or classic blues riff, you really want to learn to copy or play them verbatim. I don't mean to throw in legal terminology, but what I'm emphasizing is you want to play the notes exactly like they are, or the riffs I should say, note for note, exactly as the riff is played. A good analogy is when you learn to read or write. With our first sentences, Mary went to the store. You're not going to say Mary store to the went. Your teacher would correct you. You want to get the riffs the same way, note for note like they are. It's a great foundation when you start to make up your own riffs down the road. If you've got this solid foundation, you're simply going to come up with cooler riffs. Another reason why you want to focus on playing note for note verbatim, it gives you a better ear. If you have that discipline to copy riffs exactly like they are now, that's going to help you down the road when you start learning songs and other guitar solos by ear. Now both the blues riff and the bend and release riff in A fall within the same pentatonic minor box pattern along the 5th fret. And since they share the same notes, they harmonize together. In other words, you can construct a mini guitar solo. In other words, take one sentence, combine it with another sentence. Maybe that's a mini paragraph. But it's a good idea now to focus on combining the riffs. And then you see how solos are actually constructed. And so let's do that right now. We'll start with the original riff, the blues riff in A. And then that same note, we give it a little air in between, but that same note we ended on begins the bend and release riff. So they harmonize together. And not only that, they're going to sound good played over a backing rhythm track, which we're going to do in a minute. But before we do that, let's review combining the riffs 3 times in a row in the next clip. Now, a couple of tips before we combine the riffs with a backing track in the next clip. Number 1, we need to establish the running order. And the running order will be the combined riffs we just reviewed. So, Thē Blues Riff, followed by the bend and release riff. Then we'll go up and down the box pattern. This time it's going to be played a little bit faster than we've done earlier in the video, because by now you might be getting the hang of it. And then we'll end the sequence with the combined riff again. And don't forget, for bonus, play the harmonized ending on that top string 5th fret. Now again, the box pattern and the riffs are all movable, and you can play them in different keys along any fret position. So what we'll do again is we'll go up to D flat blues along the 9th fret, and we'll work on the combined riffs like we did with the key of A. Just to verify that running order one more time, it'll be the combined riffs going up and down the scale, ending with the combined riffs, and then for bonus, harmonized ending on D flat, which is that 1st string, 9th fret. Well, if you made it this far into the lesson, you've got a great foundation now as to how these classic or standard blues riffs sound played over various backing rhythms in different keys. We've got one more backing rhythm track, but this time there will be no guide solo track. A lot of you might be chomping at the bit to sort of do your own thing or maybe pick up the pace, and you can do that with the next track. It's going to be a little bit longer than the other ones, which gives you time to maybe try out some variations as well. So not only, if you want, you can pick up the speed and add in some extra riffs, but you could also, maybe for bonus or if you like the extra challenge, sort of rearrange the running order. This next track is going to be in B blues. That's along the 7th fret. Now you could work on the running orders we've done previously, but another option could be to mix and match the running order of riffs. You could actually start with the bend and release riff, and then shift to the blues riff. That's a great sort of muscle memory sort of challenge, but it also helps you kind of fly around the pattern a little bit more when you can start adding in variations. You could also, you don't necessarily have to go up and down the box pattern. You could literally do a riff where you just go, where you descend down the box pattern, and then maybe throw in some variations in the running order as well. So a couple of tips there, but by all means, have a little fun with the next clip, sort of doing your own thing, experimenting with different running orders, and you can do so without a guide solo track. Once you have this lesson down, you've got a great foundation now to move up to the next lesson or level with blues soloing basics. And with that lesson, we'll focus on phrasing technique using root notes, as well as some additional challenges with playing with backing rhythms.